So you consider the river water as a crop?
Well, it is a national resource.
I think this fresh water going through our lakes is now clear, not totally fresh, poor in nutrient salts than before, and so it must affect also the eastern part of the Mediterranean.
Decreased flow of Nile water reaching the Mediterranean. Do you know what effect it has on the sea?
Well, you see, on the sea, you mean?
On the sea.
On the sea. No, I don't think there is any effect of that.
So actually we have 90% of the total yearly discharge has been prevented from reaching the Mediterranean. This will actually change it drastically.
This lack of fresh water, these changes that are happening here, will affect the entire Mediterranean.
In its northward journey through half the African continent, the Nile crosses not only distance, but time. For uncounted centuries, the river has mirrored the passage of men and animals that have drawn life from it. A life often little changed since the first farmers came to its desert valley. Their existence regulated by the rise and fall of the river, many of the peasants or fellahin still water their fields and turn the soil with tools unchanged since recorded history began. The fellahin endure. The early civilizations out of which they came have long since vanished, leaving behind their burial chambers and broken temples, mute testaments of past glory and the brief tenure of power. Today, a new civilization stands on the Nile. But, as the Cousteau team discovers, the present, no less than the past, still owes its existence to the river. Year by year, more lives are suspended on the river's slender thread. In the expanding cities of Egypt and the Sudan, in Cairo and Khartoum, in Alexandria or Juba, the populations multiply, threaten to outpace the food supplied by the river's narrow margin of fertile earth. Egypt remains, as an early historian described it, the gift of the Nile, a crowded oasis locked in the immense emptiness of the desert. To meet growing needs, men have built huge structures across the Nile, turned the river god into a servant. But sometimes technology itself creates new dangers, threatens the very human ends it tries to serve.
Our problem begins in 1960,
Yes.
when the Egyptian government determined to build the high dam. And the government told us to get out from here to New Halfa, but we refused.
For most of its course since early history, the Nile has provided a clearly marked path between Central Africa and the sea. But in southern Sudan, in the vast marshlands of the Sud, even the river seems to lose its way. Below Philippe Cousteau and the Catalina spreads a watery archipelago as large as England. through the maze of channels that in the past sometimes took months to cross. The barge carrying the men and vehicles of the Cousteau overland team threads its way north toward rendezvous. In this great shallow basin, where the upper Nile loses half its water through evaporation, an endlessly varied life shares sanctuary. Here, hidden amid the drifting masses of water hyacinth and papyrus that often clog the channels, thousands of scattered tribesmen, Nuer, Dinka, or Shilluk, live in a world apart. Changing yet changeless, the Nile flows through their lives, its seasonal rise and fall the stately measures of eternity. As plane and barge make rendezvous in the northern stretches of the Sud, Philippe and his companions change transport for a further journey. By swamp vehicle, they penetrate the domain of one of the remaining tribal monarchs, still formally recognized by the Sudanese government. Like the river itself, the king of the Shilluks too is a symbol of eternity. Here, posing for Philippe with his family, with his possessions and his prized herds of cattle, with Sudanese representatives and his private guard, he is a living link between past and future, the visible assurance of tribal continuity. Because Shilluk legend still celebrates an earlier French visitor, Captain Jean-Baptiste Marchand, who led an historic march across Africa more than 8 decades ago, Philippe and the team are honored with a ceremonial display. Later, in audience with the king, Philippe is shown faded photographs of the king's ancestor with Captain Marchand, whose small party, well supplied with champagne, briefly challenged British power on the Nile.
I would like to know from His Majesty what part of the Nile does his kingdom cover? He's now calling one of the ships.
Referred to the council, Philippe's question is answered by a spokesman, saying the king's authority extends over a wide area of the Sud. But for the king of the Shilluks and the river gods of the Nile, eternity is coming to an end. A new god has come to rule. Across the land, a great rotary excavating machine is cutting the Jonglei Canal, a 200-mile trench which will provide a year-round waterway between north and south, drain vast areas of the Sud, and carry the marshaland waters to irrigation tracts downstream. But as Philippe learns from a project engineer, many of the canal's uses and its impact on people, animals, plants, and weather are still largely undefined.
Dans le dessin technique du canal tel qu'il est maintenant, est-ce qu'il est prévu de s'en servir pour l'irrigation de la campagne?
Asked if the canal will allow cheap irrigation by gravity flow, Engineer Voronkov replies that the canal level will not be high enough for such a system. Instead, a large network of pumping stations will be required for water distribution.
Actuellement, par contrat, qu'est-ce qui est prévu?
What provisions, Philippe asks, have been made for wild animals to cross the canal? There has been talk, says Voronkov, about providing for the seasonal movements of both people and animals, but nothing has been done. Such matters are not covered in the contract. In the quiet dusk, Philippe's questions about future consequences remain unanswered. Leaving the straight trench through which the meandering White Nile will soon bypass much of the Sud, Philippe and his companions again head northward in the Catalina. Now at last the team encounters the Blue Nile, the great sister tributary flowing down from the mountains of Ethiopia. Bearing in summer flood a huge burden of fertile silt, it joins the White Nile north of Khartoum. Here, a vast tract of land has been reclaimed, irrigated by water impounded behind the nearby Jebel Olia Dam. But Sudanese official Ahmed Balal reports that already a familiar menace has appeared.
And in all these projects, I understand you've been bothered by the water hyacinths.
Yes, this is really one of the big problems which we are facing, and which was a problem which has been dealing with for a long time, and which is spreading from the equatorial lakes up to the White Nile near Khartoum, as you have seen near Jebel Olia.
In Jebel Olia's reservoir, a mass of green vegetation spreads across its surface. But the countermeasures against it themselves present new difficulties and dangers, according to Sudanese expert Dr. Hassan El-Maghrabi.
How much do they spray like that every year?
Well, exactly 1,000 tons of the 2,4-D, which is a lot of herbicide.
2,4-D?
Yeah, 2-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid.
And that's a defoliant?
Yes.
What is the effect on the environment?
Well, there is a general decrease in the productivity of the White Nile. An immense decrease, as a matter of fact.
It takes what for? Fish don't grow, or?
Well, larvae fish die. Species like the tilapia, which makes a nest on the ground, does not find the opportunity to do so because the layer of the decomposed water hyacinth is several feet sometimes.
Whatever the risks, fishermen still cast their nets into the waters they always have trusted. Offered for human consumption, last link in the food chain, several fish are bought by Philippe for later analysis.
Would this type be a good indicator?
Not the best, but it could be a good indicator.
Could be good?
Yeah.
Led by the Nile, the Cousteau team moves on. For the first time, far from its upland beginnings and the languid expanses of the Sud, the river enters the great North African desert. Henceforth, the green-edged stream, its vegetation often barely a few yards wide, will be the only source of life for the peoples of northern Sudan and all of Egypt. In a basin between desert ridges, the river becomes the inland sea, called Lake Nuba in Sudan, Lake Nasser in Egypt, stretching more than 300 miles southward from Aswan High Dam. One of the engineering marvels of the modern world, a half-mile thick at its base, 364 feet high, more than 2 miles long, the Aswan High Dam dwarfs even the pyramids. A joint Soviet-Egyptian effort formally begun by Premier Khrushchev and President Nasser in 1960, the High Dam has abruptly altered the long history of the Nile. Though lower dams had been built since 1902, men for the first time could boast that they now commanded the river. In the tremendous rush of water through its spillway, they saw the promise of food for their multiplying populations. Hopes described to Philippe by Chairman Ahmadi Raouf of the Nile Valley Authority.
The High Dam is constructed for three purposes. For water, for the river control, for affecting all the floods in the continuous years, and for generating about 10 billion kilowatt hour of electricity, and to serve the water as a storage of water to be safe during all the coming years.
Carried to distant pumping stations, much of the High Dam's 10 billion kilowatt capacity is used to lift water into the network of irrigation canals. From these, in turn, the flow is drawn into smaller channels, spreading through greening fields of cotton and maize. Across the desert, new ditches draw a geometry of hope. Month by month, year by year, the growing grid reclaims new land. Through vast projects such as Kom-Ombo, the High Dam is expected to increase arable land in Egypt by 1/3, more than 2 million acres.
Now, in this area, this is Kom-Ombo, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So we flew over Kom-Ombo.
Yes, yes.
We saw a large, very large project.
Yes. This area you have mentioned, we have a very big valley here. It's called Nukra Valley. This valley, we now are working a visibility study for reclaiming this area. It's about 70,000 acres, and it's a very good land, but it will take a lot of time to reclaim it and to irrigate it by Nile water, because we have already constructed a very big pumping station, a series of pumping stations for irrigating about 70,000 acres existing now.
But the blessings of the High Dam are sometimes deceptive. Already, along some of the irrigation channels and fields, a sinister white crust has begun to appear. As team members Albert Falco and Dominic Sumian learn, the white residue is salt.
Voilà du sel. Alors là, tout est brûlé, plus rien ne pousse. On voit tout à fait. Les arbres sont marrons.
Once it was washed away by the yearly flood, now prevented by the high dam. Present irrigation methods often simply leach the salt to the surface of the desert soil, threatening to return the reclaimed fields to wasteland.
So about the salinity, we treat the land by making open drains and tile drainage in the old areas. And in the new areas, we make our projects. The irrigation projects and the drainage projects must go parallel to each other in the same time. So the land will not suffer in the future by desalinity.
Often in former years, the floods brought disaster. But as they receded, they left a gift, a thin new layer of silt that at the rate of 3 inches per century has sometimes reached a depth of 50 feet. Today, farmers themselves sometimes transport the silt to add to their sandy fields.
This is 11 years old land now. We've been working this part of land. You can see the change of soil, what happened to the soil, even very deep. You'll find it completely different. This is the type of soil we got after 11 years of work. And this is the origin of the land itself. You can see the difference if I just put you this and that. You'll see the difference of soil, what happened during 11 years of very hard work.
Swept down from the mountain highlands, often as much as 40 million tons in a year, the waterborne clouds of silt spread over the valley of the Nile, enriching and renewing the land. In the central Sudan, near Khartoum, the flood still brings its precious burden of fertile loam, feeding trees and crops in a yearly rite. But trapped behind the Aswan High Dam, no silt now reaches the fields of Egypt.
And for fertility of the land, the mud, the sediment was very important.
Yes, yes.
And how is that being replaced?
We increase the quantity of fertilizers. That's all. It is used also in the States and in all the countries, all other countries like Germany and.
Yeah, but the purchase or manufacturing of fertilizers costs money. Also.
Yes, we have already. We are fortunate because we have a very big factory in Aswan, Kima.
Yes, we visited there.
Yes.
To compensate for the loss of the silt, much of the dam's electric power is utilized in the production of vast quantities of fertilizer. This in turn must be shipped by barge from Aswan along the river which once carried it to the farmers' fields without expense. Nor does the factory's output of 300,000 tons per year begin to match the need of 5 times that amount for the Upper Nile alone.
عادي عادي خليك عادي.
هلا ما تخش يا بيت خش يا روي يلا يا روي يلا ما تخش يا بيت تسير يا بيت انت خايفه ليه يلا
At one of the larger established orchards along the lower Nile, Philippe questions grower Masale regarding the effects of the high dam.
Combien vous en produisez d'oranges?
Dans mon domaine, j'en produis à peu près 1000 tonnes. 1000 tonnes d'oranges par année.
Par an?
Par an, oui.
Told by Musali that he raises 1,000 tons of oranges for shipment each year. Philippe asks whether production has increased or decreased since the building of the high dam.
C'est avec le limon, comme on a parlé tout à l'heure, que ça prend de moins en moins. Alors il faut compenser avec des produits chimiques, de l'engrais chimique. C'est ce que je fais d'ailleurs.
Musali replies that thus far there has been no change. But to maintain the orchard's rate of yield, he is being compelled to add larger and larger amounts of fertilizer to make up for the loss of the silt in recent years.
Ça coûte beaucoup plus cher sur le plan économique, vous payez beaucoup plus.
Sur le plan économique,
oui, vous payez, oui, ça vous coûte quand même.
C'est-à-dire l'achat de l'engrais coûte.
L'achat de l'engrais. Évidemment, auparavant, vous irriguiez et l'eau
The silt, says Musali, was far richer in organic matter.
C'était super.
But not all the dam's effects can be measured in coin or human hunger. Today, a great circular cofferdam marks payment of a debt to the past. The famed monuments and temples of Philae have been resurrected and saved from oblivion. Stone by stone, at a safe height above the lake, artisans are restoring the courts and colonnades of Egyptian and Roman rule, the serried steps, or Nilometer, by which the ancients measured the rise and fall of the river. South from Philae, an unparalleled international effort already had rescued one of the supreme treasures of Western civilization's beginnings, the massive rock temples of Abu Simbel, here visited by Philippe and Sumyan. Today, history is their only kingdom. Yet serene and imperial, seemingly immune to defeat or disbelief, the great figures stare across the centuries, mute reminders they help make us what we are. Tokens of our brief history, they too might have vanished beneath the lake. Instead, around an arching buttress, a great mound of stone was built to provide a new and secure site for the colossal statues and their adjoining sanctuaries. We have saved ancient kings and gods from the high dam. The living have not always been so fortunate. Great stone monuments have been safely moved. But there are other ruins more recent, made of mud and plaster, described by their survivors.
Acacia has lost its lands and has lost its houses and lost palm trees and lost its fields, and the water is up, very up and rising now, as you see. You see this house is also destroyed, and the water also has came up more than before, as you see. The agriculture is very few, and also we have more people working in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and also in Khartoum, and they send us some money so as to live.
The ancients believed the Nile came from the land of the ghosts. Today, the ghosts lie here. The waters cover not only uncounted monuments and tombs and traces of prehistory in the river's desert corridor, They have drowned the fields and habitations of people still living, most of them now exiles 1,000 miles away. Near the site of Wadi Halfa, a former town commissioner talks of the one-time river port and desert center.
This was Old Alpha?
Yes, this is a mosque at the village was called the Kem.
It was beautiful.
Yes, it's a beautiful site. It's near the garden of the Nile Hotel. It was a very fine city, one of the oldest city in the Sudan. The population in it was about 52,000.
52,000?
Yes.
And now?
And now it is about 8,000. All people were immigrated to the new Halfa at the eastern of the Sudan. The water rise up about 50 meters.
50 meters?
Yes, 50 meters.
School director Ahmed Bayram also mourns his vanished community.
Really. And we are sorry to have lost such a place, a town like Wadi Halfa. Although we are familiarized with the struggle, our struggle really began in 1902 with the first construction of Swan Dam. And then there was the heightening, the first heightening in 1912, and the second heightening. We are always threatened by these heightenings of the Swan Dam until the high dam was constructed to leave us in this desert. In this way, we have lost everything, and all the people were really shocked, and they struggled to leave. They were really crying and weeping when they left their country, although they are still in the Sudan, but they were much familiarized with this place, and it was really a shock to leave this place to New Halfa. And we have prepared to reconstruct Halfa on the shore of the lake here. It was a very sad scene, and we were very shocked to see that all the gardens, all the houses, all the buildings, even the graves of our deads were all submerged bit by bit until they left us in this state as you see now.
Yet from this harsh land, many have refused exile. Stubborn and baffled, stranded almost within sight of their former doorways, they cling in mute loyalty to a place suddenly become strange and alien. Today they are trying to begin again. Born to a desert without rain, they are becoming fishermen. A new fishing industry is being developed at various settlements around the 300-mile lake. To Jean-Paul Cornu, a member of the Cousteau team, Sudanese official Muhammad Ali tells of joint efforts to help the readjustment of Wadi Halfa's displaced survivors.
The population here, some of them who refused to leave the place and they stayed here in their place, and they have no work to do but to fish. But unfortunately, they have no experience to fish because at that time there was no fish here, and most of them, many of them, and the majority, they don't know how to fish. So when we came here to utilize the fisheries resources in the place, we have to train the people, and we have also to have to encourage them to come to the lake and fish and make money out of this. And for this, we contact our friends in the Chinese People Republic of China to assist here.
People's Republic of China.
Yes, you see Mr. Ko is with me here. They're offering us assistance under certain loan or agreement between the two governments, the Sudanese government and the Chinese government.
So you are the expert here and you are training the Sudanese people to fish.
Yes. Just now, our Sudanese friend have said what I want to say.
And how many fish do you expect to fish every day?
Every
when
day.
The industry will be completed?
When the factory is completed, we plan to produce 5 tons of fish every day.
Marked by the monument to Soviet aid, the Aswan High Dam remains the pivotal structure in Egypt, central to the nation's hopes. 4,500 years ago, Aswan itself was a frontier trading center and fortress, guarding Egypt's southern approaches. Today it is again a frontier town, Egypt's face to the future. Source of more power than Egypt can yet readily use, peopled by a growing percentage of skilled technicians, site of new factories and well-supplied marketplaces, Aswan City is a symbol of prosperous modernity. It is here that a score of agencies are trying to assemble a coherent plan for the balanced development of Lake Nasser's commercial and recreational resources. Yet old and new live easily side by side. Within sight of the high dam, much of the life remains unchanged. Women still carry water jars upon their heads with regal grace, or wash the family's garments in the river's flow. To frighten fish into his nets, the boy strikes the water exactly as do Ugandan tribal fishermen, 3,000 miles to the south. Still a nation of farmers, most of Egypt's peasants still wrest a living from the soil with the tools and patient methods invented at the beginning of Western civilization. Not far from the high dam's turbines, the peasant still works his counterweighted shaduf, irrigating less than an acre between sunrise and sunset, guiding the great Nile to his little fields with a hoe. With the sakia, or water wheel, turned by a circular cog drawn by oxen, a farmer can sometimes water almost 5 acres in a day. As the team flies north, past the high dam and the first of the river cataracts, even Aswan seems an inconsequential fact at the edge of a limitless waste. Barely 4% of Egypt is arable land. All the rest is desert. Yet here too, in this wilderness, in this frozen geologic tumult of scarps and canyons and ancient riverbeds, other men have left their marks, the tombs and tracings of forgotten habitations, now locked in silence. At Deir el-Bahari, entombed in the mountain wall, the presence of Queen Hatshepsut now presides over desert space. But the fertile fields on the river's edge are reserved for the living. Along the Nile, like jewels on a necklace, remain the dazzling fragments of the civilization the river alone made possible. Komombo, Luxor, Karnak, the step pyramid of Saqqara, designed by Imhotep, civilization's first known genius. Close by, the rhomboidal pyramid companion. The celebrated pyramids of Giza, Mekarino, Kefren, Cheops. But here the life of the Nile is swiftly changing. The distance between past and present abruptly widened. Amid the commercial traffic, the familial patterns of ordinary life go on. But monuments now are hidden amid the clutter of urban sprawl. The dry, clear air that for so long has preserved ancient pyramids and temples is clouded now with the smoke of factories and refineries. An industrial haze hangs over the habitations of people unable to escape their own pollution. The river no longer carries its cargo of silt. Instead, it now bears an increasing burden of urban waste. Here, Yves Zlotnica, a member of the Cousteau team, takes water samples to test for industrial poisons and other contaminants. At the turn of the century, Egypt had a population of 10 million. Today, there are nearly that many in Cairo alone, and the national census has quadrupled. Yet, despite heroic efforts at reclamation, Egypt has less arable land today than it had 30 years ago. The expanding cities are taking over the very land needed to feed them. Even Cairo's city of the dead, the vast cemetery first established in the early Middle Ages, has become a refuge for the living. Here it is estimated that as many as 1 million inhabitants have invaded the sanctuary and set up a marginal nocturnal existence in the tombs. Northward from Cairo's spreading megalopolis lies the Nile's ultimate gift, a great fertile delta that stretches in a widening triangle to the Mediterranean coast, more than 100 miles away. Here at last, the Nile divides in two, the Damietta branch eastward, the Rosetta to the west. Below the Catalina lie 8,500 square miles of the richest land in Egypt. Every foot of it transported ton by ton, century by century, by the Nile from the mountain highlands of her southern neighbors. Egypt exists on the river's gift of alien soil. Proceeding now by the expedition's vans, Philippe and his companions drive through a countryside dotted with prosperous towns and villages, through the greening fields of cotton, fruit, maize, and other crops raised not only for use in Egypt, but to be sold for export. Everywhere, like the arteries and veins of a living body, a great network of canals, ditches, and minor tributaries carry water to the fields. Near the sea, the delta receives 7 inches rainfall each year. At Cairo, less than 1. All else needed by the crops must be provided from the river's slackening flow. But for all these demands on the river, there is a price. Along the natural causeways that sometimes provide the only slim barrier between the great inland freshwater lakes and the sea, Philippe and his companions pass ominous bits of wreckage, isolated lighthouses or minarets, damaged structures. Once the river's yearly burden of sediment steadily extended the delta's shores. Today, the Nile's vastly diminished flow brings no silt at all. With Philippe, an Egyptian technician describes the consequences at the Rosetta outlet.
But this is broken. The road has disappeared.
Yeah, the road has disappeared. From 1974, last time I came here, the road extends to this minaret, and now the road is finished.
So the erosion is already visible. It's already destroying some installations.
Yes. You can find these columns, electrical columns.
Look, the water is already passing into the Nile there.
Yes.
Since 1974 was the last time you were here?
Yes.
And the road was intact?
Yeah, the road finished.
So in 4 years, the sea has gained about 20 meters.
All this area. All this area is gained by sea.
At the Damietta branch, too, the same process is being repeated. Here, a guide reports, the sea also threatens to breach the narrow coastal barrier, invade the lakes, and overrun the most fertile land in Egypt.
What is the rate of erosion here?
Rate of erosion? About 1 meter per year.
1 meter per year?
From 1964 till now. Yeah.
Samples of water and bottom sediment taken from the lake by Sumian for later analysis confirm its increasing brackishness, sometimes flowing in to replace the depleted underground water tables. The salt water is infiltrating the lakes. Step by step, the sea is beginning to win the battle against the land. Across the causeway on the seaward side, a lone fisherman fights a losing battle. Once the fish were taken from these waters in the thousands of tons. Today they are gone. In Alexandria, at the Institute for Coastal Research, Director Kashem and his associate, Dr. Akram, explain why.
By the construction of the Aswan High Dam and the cessation of the Nile flood, the sardine fishery in these areas in front of the delta has completely disappeared. Because, as you see, the Nile flood with its nutrient salts and fresh water and this forms a good blooming of plankton as a food base for fishes to aggregate and collect.
We used to have an average yearly discharge from the Nile River, which is estimated at 42 kilometer cube per year, see? So now we have only an average from 3 to 4 kilometer cube.
That's
it's one tenth almost. Yes. So actually 90% of the discharge has been prevented from reaching the Mediterranean.
But that's not the high dam.
That's
the various irrigation.
That's due to the high dam, and the water of the Nile is now going to the land for irrigation, of course.
From hidden beginnings for countless millennia, the Nile has made its unceasing journey from the mountains to the sea. Astonished by flood in the cloudless days of summer, men in the Egyptian desert thanked Hapi, the Nile god. They did not know that the river's life and theirs came from rains and springs nearly 4,000 miles away. Across the Nile's path lay the isolated habitats of animals and men, sanctuaries filled with the creatures of some biblical bestiary, landscapes of innocent cultures, black or Bedouin, unaware that they were already doomed. Now the Nile has crossed a new threshold, moved from past to present, into a changing world filled with the sounds of engines and traffic. Abruptly, a dam barricades the river's flow. Below it, 1,000 outlets draw water from the current, bleeding the great artery to irrigate the growing crops. The river god has been dismissed. In one of the most massive attempts ever made to reorder nature, man has thrown dam after dam across the Nile. Nag Hammadi, Roseris, Sennar, Jebel Olia, Asyut, Damietta, Rosetta, Aswan High Dam, most powerful of all. We have seized the power, but the consequences are yet to be counted. Like the High Dam, these too are announcements of power, symbols of the civilization that lined the Nile with temples, that developed hieroglyphs, founded libraries, tracked the movement of stars, invented gods, provided many of the furnishings of our minds. Like the river, our beginnings too often lie beyond our sight. Yet they are gone, leaving behind only these scattered relics of a search for immortality, reminders that kings also die, and power can be no more than illusion. Mute warnings that technology and all its wonders cannot save us from the folly of our multiplying numbers. Perhaps we have mastered the river. We have yet to master ourselves. It is written of the Nile, I am all, the past, the present, and the future. Today, little of the great river enters the sea where the fisherman casts, still waiting for the wave that will fill his net.